Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
You know, one of the things that makes Greenlight Guru unique is what we call our Guru Edge. And more specifically, we have a whole team of people, medical device gurus, who have a ton of industry experience prior to joining Greenlight Guru. And I thought we would try something a little bit different on the Global Medical Device Podcast. I thought we would feature some of our gurus and let you know a little bit about who they are and their background and how they work with customers and medical device companies all over the globe. So enjoy this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast. This is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer, and excited to continue our Meet the Guru, I guess, series. I don't know if that's the right word, but another episode with one of the medical device gurus at Greenlight Guru. Today, joining me is Tom Rish. Tom is a senior medical device guru at Greenlight Guru. So, Tom, welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, I know about all your wonderfulness and how excited you are about this industry and the love you have for helping customers get products to market. And I thought today we could, you and I, have a conversation and share some of these tidbits and maybe in the process uncover some tips and pointers that some of the listeners might be able to take back to their companies and implement. Sound okay?
Yep, that sounds perfect. I'm excited to talk through all that.
All right. So I guess before we start diving too deep, maybe 30,000 foot view or high level overview, let folks who you are and a little bit about your background in the medical device industry.
Yeah, definitely. So, from Northeast Indiana, and with that comes a lot of knowledge of the orthopedic industry. So when I was a freshman in college, I went to Purdue. I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I wasn't sure exactly what kind. And I was fortunate to get introduced to some people that worked in the orthopedic industry and learned about this new program called biomedical engineering. It was new at Purdue at the time, at least, and decided that might be a cool thing to try out. So I did that. Was able to work at some contract manufacturers in college in the summers up in that area, and started out at Zimmer and when I graduated from Purdue, and that was a great place to start learning about the industry. Worked on some orthopedic implants and instruments on total knee systems there. Moved over to a startup, helped implement a quality system at that company in the ortho industry, and then about 3 years ago, found myself interacting with you. I learned about Greenlight on the news and thought it might be cool to take some of what I learned in the past in the medical device industry, but learn some new things in the tech industry. And that's where I find myself today.
Yeah, it's an awesome journey. And, I've been to the town of Warsaw, Indiana. I know you have as well. It's such a strange little town, don't you think?
It definitely is. It's changed a lot. So I remember when I started, it definitely felt like something out there in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. There are great companies there, a lot of great people that work there. And we would bring surgeons there all the time. So there are a lot of good restaurants. There's a lake there, Winona Lake. They've gotten even more restaurants and a lot of young people starting to get jobs there. So it's a hidden gem there, I would say. It's gotten a lot better over the last 10 or so years.
Yeah, my stint in Warsaw, I was doing some consulting at the time, and I was actually doing some consulting at Zimmer, and I got to stay in the Z Hotel. You know where the Z Hotel is?
Yeah, definitely.
It was a good time. But it's for those that have never been there who might be listening, Warsaw is, last I checked, a town of about 12,000 people, yet the largest orthopedic companies in the world have substantial operations in this town. So everybody in that community knows about orthopedic, and I would imagine that the med device industry is keeping that town growing like crazy. So kind of an anomaly.
Yeah, that is true. They own the town, like you said, the hotel. they bring people to interviews there, and I was supposed to stay there, but I think they had a big event with a bunch of surgeons in town. So of course I got the boot, and I they gave me a room at the Ramada Inn, and it was in the middle of summer, and the air conditioning wasn't working there, and I think I
Oh
slept
no.
like an hour before my interview. So
Well, you got the job. So
I wish I would have been in the Z Hotel. Yeah.
Well,
So I haven't got to stay there yet.
well, maybe someday, who knows? You mentioned when you were describing a little bit about your journey in this industry that, one day you saw some news about Greenlight. I remember the day you called me very well. And, I applaud you for reaching out. And, you were curious about this thing that we were doing at Greenlight. And, it's hard to believe it's been, almost coming up on 3 years in a couple months. So during that period of time, you've worked with a lot of companies, doing a lot of things. You've actually done a lot of things within Greenlight. I guess share maybe some of your favorite parts about being a guru. What do you enjoy most?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, I mean, getting to try so many new things. That was what initially drew me to Greenlight, especially at the big companies. You get in a routine of doing a lot of the same things. I learned so many good things at Zimmer, and that was an amazing place to work. I did a lot of design matrices and a lot of risk matrices, though. So I was ready to try some new things. The startup allowed me to do that. But then Greenlight, it just opened up a whole new door to learning about more of the business side of things, and sales, and working with customers, and working with just different personalities. And so, that kind of ties in. I've just met so many impressive people while working here, clients, where they've taken a big leap to start something on their own, or they work for a startup, and they're trying to really bring something to market that is going to help people throughout the world. And so just being around people like that, I think, pushes you to want to do better. And I'm just very grateful for all the people I have got to meet, and also the technology. I was very focused on mechanical orthopedic implants, and since I've come here, I've learned a lot about software as medical device. I've learned about electrical devices and IVDs. So just the exposure to so many different new things has been so cool.
I mean, yeah, it's that term. I know one of the roles or one of the things that I do with, especially all new hires that join Greenlight, is talk to them a little bit about the medical device industry, because not everybody comes in with your kind of background. And that term medical device is an interesting term because of the depth and breadth and variety that's within that. I mean, you hit on a few: IVDs, software as a med device, orthopedics, electromechanical devices. It's really interesting to think about that term, and the FDA 820 regulations of 1345 and EU MDR. And I don't know, maybe we'll get into that here in a few moments, but heck, let's just do it now. How does one work within the same framework but have so many different kinds of devices that follow those same rules? Anything come to mind? Tips, pointers, practical advice?
Yeah, definitely. I think, that was one of the things that blew my mind, actually, when I really start looking at the regulations more. It's funny because you get a job in the industry, and you have these tasks that you need to get done, and you're really focused on them. But sometimes you don't take a step back and look at the big picture of things. Like, I don't think I ever read FDA Part 820 or ISO 1345 the first 5 years of my career. And so when I did start looking at those, I just realized it's not as complicated as you would seem to. And I think some people struggle because they think that their industry is overly complicated, or needs to have very complex procedures and processes. But when you really break down the regulations, they're pretty simple, and they're all about efficiencies and making sure you document things, you can find things. And so, that's the one thing I always try to help explain to clients, that no matter what industry you're in, we're all starting from the same point, and there are basic principles that apply to everyone, that if you do those, it's really going to help you out in the long run.
Yeah, and you've had the opportunity to, your primary responsibilities at Greenlight have been in the customer success realm, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few moments. But you also are very involved with the product side of things. But another area that you're very involved with is being a subject matter expert as part of our sales team. So all of those things considered, I mean, I'm guessing here, you probably have interacted with, I don't know, 1,000 companies. That's probably a fair number, right?
Yeah, now that you say that, you're probably right.
So I'm curious about your favorite story, and it could be a customer story, it could be a product story, it could be, talking to somebody going through the sales process to learn more about Greenlight. So, what favorite stories come to mind?
Yeah, for me, so I love the stories. This is more on the client side, customer side. I've been fortunate enough to work with about 3 people now. They're all in the ortho industry, which is kind of interesting. I mean, we try to balance things out so that the gurus get assigned people that they're going to be the most helpful to. So that's probably the main reason why. But it was one man teams, and so I remember working with a surgeon who had an idea that he had come up with, and he was by himself. Same with the sales rep that decided to go out on his own and start something. And then the last person was a guy that had done some marketing at a bigger medical device company and knew what it took to commercialize a product, but didn't know much about the regulations. And they all came to us, and I think they all felt like this is going to be a really daunting task. We got a lot we need to do. Are we ever going to get to where we need to go? And it's just fun to sit down with them, explain some of the things I was just saying. This isn't as complicated as some people make it out to be. Let's look at the regulations. Let's focus on the areas that are important to you. We always talk about bootstrapping your QMS and focusing on the areas that make sense now. Worry about operations and other quality things later when the time is right. But it was just so rewarding to help those 3 individuals. They ended up over time hiring in some consultants to help out along the way, but they were all able to get to their point where their device was used in either a clinical trial or one of them was a class 1, so they were able to do an actual surgery on it. The other one got their product submitted, and it's just a great feeling to know that you helped somebody to get to where they wanted to go. They had the idea, they were all geniuses, but just to help them break it down and get to where they need to go was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something again. We have a colleague, Taylor Brown, who, well, I guess she's becoming famous for this saying, it's not that deep. And I think that saying applies to the regulations. I've been doing this for a bit myself, and before the Greenlight experience, I worked with a lot of startups that were making this way harder than it needed to be. And I think those 3 stories that you shared, I mean, there's enough challenges that your company is going to be faced with just on the technical side of things. If you can simplify life, especially in the areas of quality system, why not do that?
Yeah, definitely. I know. I think it is a lot of just habits that are formed. Like I remember leaving a big company and going to a startup. I had developed some bad habits that were probably necessary for a larger company to run. Some cases, though, I know like people will get observations during an audit. They were following the regulations just fine. There were no problems there, but they had created these internal processes that were so complicated and they weren't following them. And that got them an observation. And I remember seeing that thinking, wow, I just didn't even know that you could get an observation for that. And it really made me realize to keep it simple. And like you said, it's really not that deep. Make sure you understand the regulations and what they say, and you'll be fine.
Well, and I think that's one of the value propositions that Greenlight brings to our customers is we really try to simplify it. Like I said, there's so many other things that demand the attention of the medical device professional, worrying about perfect procedures and all these processes. And don't mishear me; those are important, but they don't have to be so complicated. I mean, I probably have shared this particular example a time or two on the Global Medical Device podcast, but it's one that rings true. I mean, I remember the first consulting customer that I had. This would have been back in 2006 timeframe, and I was brought in to help them, kind of shore up their quality system. And a lot of the work had already been done by somebody before me, and part of my objective was to get it buttoned up and ready for go to market. And ISO certification, all those sorts of things. And a lot of the work that I was doing early on with them was remote. I didn't have a ton of interaction with the actual principals of the company. But doing kind of a desktop audit, if you will, from my location, reviewing procedures, comparing them to regulations, like, yeah, this is good. I mean, it makes sense. And then I actually spent some time on site, and I asked one of the engineers, like, hey, show me your this document, and as it was defined in a particular procedure. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I go, well, it's in this procedure because I've never read that procedure. And like, oh goodness, we've got a problem here. There's a huge disconnect. And I think that's what a lot of companies struggle with. Like they write procedures to comply with regulations, but they don't actually reduce it to practice. I mean, any tips or pointers or stories of how you've helped companies understand the importance of not only aligning with the regulations, but actually following your procedures?
Yeah, that is an interesting story. I mean, I feel like there is a lot of overload when it comes to those procedures, and I know everyone's attention spans are getting even shorter these days, it seems like. But I think people are going to they're going to they're going to find whatever is the most efficient way to do things. People generally like to be efficient. They like to get things done. They like to take the path of least resistance. So I always think it's best to write your procedures while you're doing something. So like, obviously it's got to be pretty early on, but don't try to just sit and write your procedure without ever trying it out first. And I know a lot of people get into situations where they write these step-by-step instructions in the procedures, and it's maybe 50 steps long. But then once people start doing it, they realize, oh, that's a waste of time. That's not efficient. Overall, the regulations, they want to make sure your procedures are working for you to, one, develop a quality product, but two, just to have a well-run company. So I always say, test out your procedures when you're writing them in a practical setting to make sure they're going to be helpful.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, I mean, this might be a misuse of the word, but it's almost like you're auditing it as it's happening, sort of. I mean, you may not call it an audit, but you're just making sure that the things that you're defining actually align with how you intend or plan to do business. That's a really good tip. As I've mentioned, you've been primarily a part of the customer success team at Greenlight Guru. I guess maybe take a few moments and describe what your keys to customer success are.
Yeah, obviously what we've been talking about, keep it simple. I think that's important. Focus on what you need to now. So if you're a startup and you're trying to launch a product, let's get all your user needs and your inputs documented. And let's start thinking about risk now, but let's not worry about calibration or preventative maintenance on stuff quite yet. And from a procedure standpoint, but also just a workload standpoint, focus on the things that are going to help you now. I think the one thing I see people struggle with all across the industry is focus. There are so many different problems to solve in the medical device industry. And even now, like with COVID, new stuff coming up, people like to shift a lot. And I always recommend to people, especially starting out early, make sure you have a plan, stick to it. It obviously can evolve over time, but make sure you have a clear business plan, a clear project plan. Focus on the things you need to focus on now, and worry about some of those other things later. I've seen too many people start just designing a product, making some prototypes. They don't really know the intended use, but they want to get it out there. They realize it's a class 3 device. So then they're like, oh, well, we're going to change it to try to get it into a class 2. And 6 months later, they're still in the same spot they were to begin with. So I'm a big about creating a plan, staying focused, and not deviating too much.
It sounds like you might have been listening on a phone call I had earlier today. I was talking to this startup company, and they're like, oh, I think we're too early to even consider Greenlight. I'm like, all right, tell me more about what's going on in your world. They're like, well, we by the end of this year, we'd like to be at a point where we're ready for an IDE clinical study. Oh, okay. well, what are you doing about your design controls? They go, oh, we're not worried about that for right now. And I was confused. I suspect you might be confused too. If somebody's in that situation, what would you suggest they do? How do they tackle this? I mean, you talked about user needs and inputs and risk, but I guess if you've never done this before, that might seem overwhelming. So, what practical advice do you have for folks that might be faced with that situation?
Yeah, first off, I would say I totally sympathize with you. As engineers, we want to build stuff, we want to test stuff, we want to make stuff. We don't want to document stuff. And I remember a lot of friends leaving the medical device industry because they could go somewhere else and work on other products and not have to document it to the same extent. And I remember even thinking, man, I should have been a mechanical engineer. I don't know why I'm biomedical. I pretty much kept myself locked into paperwork. But, I was in the same spot. I always like to do my risk matrices at the end of a project. I like to do design controls towards the end. But what you realize is you're going to spend probably 3 to 4 weeks documenting a bunch of just doing paperwork, nonstop paperwork anyway, if you do it that way, because you need it for your submission, you need it for an audit. What I found is if you split it out and jot down a few user needs here today, or let's say you have a phone call with a surgeon, you write those down, put them right into Greenlight even, and then you do a couple more the next day, a couple more the next day. It really doesn't feel like paperwork at that point. And again, just kind of having a plan and spreading it out over time really makes it feel a lot less like paperwork. I can't even, I remember we had a project deadline we were trying to hit and we hadn't finished our risk matrix and we had like a week left before we were trying to hit that deadline. And our first risk meeting of the week, it was probably on a Monday, we were in there for 3 hours and I think we got through like 2 line items arguing about probability and severity.
I know, I've been there, man. I've been there.
So that made me realize don't keep it to the end because it just makes it 100 times worse.
Well, not only does it make it worse, but at that point, you're not really getting value out of it. And that's why, at least in my experience, when I was behaving that way early on in my career, it's like that's why I kind of loathed the documentation because it just seemed like I was doing something to satisfy a procedure or check a box. And once, for me, the switch flipped and I was like, oh, if I do this as I'm going through the process, I can actually learn and it actually adds value and I can actually use this information to communicate with other stakeholders. So I think that's, not everybody gets there, but when you get there and that light bulb goes on, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is a complete difference.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're right. It basically defeats the purpose to wait till the end. And we all have the same goal of helping people and providing quality products. And that's just not the way to do it. People always say it's cliche, but if you were doing this for a family member, would you just rush the risk matrix? Probably not.
All right, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with this next question. Which part of the quality management system really aggravates or frustrates you, and why?
Ooh, that is an excellent question.
I told you I was going to put you on the spot. So
yeah, from my past experience, the thing that always frustrated me the most was internal audits because just like everyone else, we did majorly as a checkbox activity. I mean, I even remember starting internal audits and thinking, I probably need to put 1 or 2 observations on here to make it look like I did it fairly, but I don't want to do any more than 2 or anything like that. So I guess it's not a frustration with the regulation because I think internal audits can be extremely helpful. Just if anything, as a trial run for how your actual audit's going to go. But I never really looked at it that way. I looked at it as just checking a box, putting a little evidence on there. So I always tell people now, this is your shot to prove that you're ready for an audit. And I remember right before I came here, they started doing the unannounced audits on the MDD. So that's one area that I think people kind of, I don't want to say slack, but cut some corners that I don't think you should.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Your internal auditing process should be very robust and And I always advise people that you should be way tougher on yourself than any third party is ever going to be. The time to find out the gotchas and the oh shits in your systems is not during an FDA inspection or an ISO audit. You should find that internally first and have an opportunity to improve that. So I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah, I think people, like, when those audits happen, it's a terrible feeling to not know how it's going to go. And there's no reason why you should even be in that spot. Like, you should have a pretty good idea based on your internal audits how the real thing's going to go. And it just cuts back on the anxiety a lot.
For sure. So, working on wrapping up our conversation today, tell us a little bit about Tom Rish, the human. I mean, what are some things that about you that you enjoy that you're willing to share with the listening audience?
Yeah, definitely. So I am married and have 3 kids. So I have 3 young boys, and that has changed my hobbies significantly. I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a almost 1-year-old. He's 11 months old. So I have a great time with them. We do a lot of things outside. We like to ride bikes. We like to play football, play basketball. My oldest is really getting into golf now, and
Nice.
I realized I have a lot of practice to do, because I think once you have a kid, you're like, you got to be kind of good in front of them. So I need to start practicing a little bit more there. But like that kind of stuff, we've been doing a lot of house projects. So I've been trying to work on getting a little more handy there. So the quarantine, I was majorly dreading it, but it's been good in some ways because I've got to spend more time with those guys, and then also picked up some new skills around the house that I probably want to have.
Nice. We'll have to have you and another one of our colleagues, Wade, compare notes. I know Wade's always talking about his home projects, but anything else that you think is important for listeners to know about you or customer success at Greenlight or Greenlight Guru in general, or just being a medical device professional before we wrap things up today?
Yeah, I mean, I know the people that work with us directly are well aware of this, but our Guru team is so passionate about the medical device industry. We love working with customers. We've worked with enough now that we've seen so many different situations along the regulatory pathway and design controls, and gotten a lot of good feedback from how audits go. And I think it's important for people to know that we're always open to providing support or advice. Even if you're not a client and you have questions, we love meeting new people and learning new things and trying to give you tips along the way. So much of this industry is about, have you done it before, and about experience. And so it's a great place to work, and we love interacting with the industry.
No, I appreciate that share. And folks, I have to echo what Tom says. And I don't know how I can prove or disprove what I'm about to tell you, but I have high confidence that Greenlight Guru has the most knowledge about anything and everything you could ever face as a medical device company than any other resource out there. You can confirm that through our blog and our amazing content, through our other episodes of the Global Medical Device Podcast, all the webinars, or pick up the phone and call us, or just work with our team. So encourage you all to take advantage of that. We are a very the Guru team is very much an altruistic group of people. We love what we do. We're passionate about medical devices. We very much eat, breathe, sleep the mission of improving the quality of life, because we know how important medical devices and these technologies are to improving humanity. So if there's anything we can do to help you, just reach out to us. Go to www.greenlight.guru, learn more about our software platform and our products and services, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. As always, I guess before I wrap up, let me thank Tom Rish, Senior Medical Device Guru at Greenlight Guru. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
All right. And as always, this is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer, and you have been listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast.